People love to say that family is the greatest gift you will ever receive. They put it on greeting cards and cross-stitch it onto pillows and repeat it at Thanksgiving dinners like a prayer. I believed it once. I believed it so completely that I ignored every single warning sign for 3 years, smiled through dinners that made my stomach hurt, and convinced myself that the coldness in my mother-in-law's eyes, whenever she looked at me, was just her personality. It was not her personality. It was a preview. I am 31 years old. I own a small but thriving home healthcare practice in a suburb outside of Columbus, Ohio. My daughter is 2.5, and right now she is sitting on the floor of my office pulling the stuffing out of a plush elephant toy while I type patient notes, completely unbothered by the mess she is creating. My life is quieter than it has ever been, and that quiet is not emptiness. It is the specific, hard-earned peace that only exists on the other side of chaos. I did not build this life to prove anything to anyone. I built it because it was the only foundation I trusted, one I had laid with my own hands, without anyone standing over me deciding whether I deserved to stand on it. Let me tell you how I got here. I met my husband at a hospital fundraising event when I was 25. I was a registered nurse working in the cardiac unit. He was charming and easy to laugh with, and he had the kind of warm, open face that made you feel like he would never lie to you. We dated for a year. He proposed on a Tuesday evening in our apartment kitchen while I was making pasta. It was not dramatic or elaborate. He just looked at me and said he did not want to spend another day not being sure I would always be there. I said yes before the water on the stove finished boiling. His mother owned a real estate portfolio that she had built over 30 years: commercial properties, rental units, a storage facility. The total value was somewhere around $7 million. She had one child, my husband, and he was fully expected to inherit all of it. She never let either of us forget that fact. Not for a single week of our marriage. She was not a warm woman. She shook my hand at my wedding instead of hugging me. She referred to me as the nurse in conversations when she thought I could not hear her, as if my name were a detail too minor to retain. She had a sister-in-law on her side, her younger sister, who lived nearby and served as a kind of loyal deputy, always agreeing with her, always present at family events, always watching me with the same flat, evaluating expression. I told myself it was manageable. I told myself that plenty of women had difficult mothers-in-law, and that it did not mean the marriage was broken. My husband always said his mother was just like that with everyone, and that underneath it all she respected me. I now understand that this was him managing his own discomfort, not telling me the truth. When I found out I was pregnant, I was 11 weeks along. I had kept it to myself for a few weeks, just holding it quietly, going to my early appointments alone because I wanted to be sure before I told anyone. When I finally told my husband, he cried. I had never seen him cry before. He held me for a long time in our bedroom and said this was the best thing that had ever happened to him. For about 72 hours, everything felt exactly as good as it was supposed to feel. Then he suggested we tell his mother together, at Sunday dinner. I want to be honest about what I felt when he said that. There was a small, specific dread in my chest, not a scream. Just a quiet, knowing pull, the way your body sometimes understands something your mind is still negotiating. I said yes anyway. Sunday dinner was at her house, a large colonial in a gated community that she kept immaculately and coldly, like a museum exhibit of a home rather than a place where anyone actually lived. My husband's aunt was there as well, sitting at the far end of the table, cutting her food into precise small squares. My husband announced the pregnancy over the salad course. He was smiling. I watched my mother-in-law's face. She did not smile. She set her fork down carefully, looked at me, and said, "How convenient." My husband laughed awkwardly and said, "Mom." She cut him off. She said that she had worked her entire life to build something worth leaving behind, and that she was not naive about why a woman with no family money of her own would get pregnant within 3 years of marrying into a significant estate. She said the timing was very interesting. She said she hoped I understood that a pregnancy did not automatically guarantee anything legally. I sat very still. I had learned, over 3 years, that reacting visibly gave her something to work with. I said calmly that I had not gotten pregnant to access anyone's estate, that I was a working nurse who paid half our mortgage and had my own savings, and that I would have appreciated a different response to news about her first grandchild. She looked at me for a long moment, then she picked her fork back up and changed the subject. My husband said nothing. Not one word. He looked at his plate and he ate his salad and he let the moment pass like it was a weather event nobody could control. That night, lying in bed, I told him that his silence had hurt me. He said he knew, and that he was sorry, and that she would come around. He said she was just surprised. He said she did not mean it the way it sounded. I said, she meant exactly the way it sounded. He did not answer. About 10 days later, my mother-in-law called me directly and asked me to come over for tea. She said she owed me an apology and that she wanted to talk, just the two of us, and make things right before the pregnancy progressed, and things became more complicated. Her voice was measured and even, she said all the right words. I almost did not go. Something in me was resistant in a way I could not fully articulate, but I had spent 3 years trying to make that relationship work, and I was pregnant, and I wanted to believe that this was a genuine gesture. I wanted, very badly, to be wrong about her. Before I left the house, I did something I cannot entirely explain except as instinct. I opened the voice memo app on my phone, pressed record, and tucked it into the outer pocket of my bag where the microphone sat just below the zipper opening. I had done nothing like that before in my life. I am still not sure exactly why I did it that day. But I did. She made tea herself rather than ordering it from a delivery service the way she usually did when I visited. She brought it out on a tray, 2 cups, already poured. She was gracious and composed in a way that was different from her usual cold efficiency. She asked about my health. She asked about my prenatal appointments. She was performing warmth, and she was not bad at it. We sat at her kitchen table and she said she had been thinking about what she said at dinner and that it had come out wrong, and that of course she was happy about the baby. She said she had fears about the estate that she had not communicated well, that her concern was never about me personally but about protecting what she had built. I nodded. I said I understood. I kept my hands around my teacup but I did not drink from it. There was something slightly off about the tea. I noticed it when I brought the cup close, a faint undertone beneath the chamomile that was not chamomile. I had worked in a cardiac unit for 5 years. I had administered and tracked dozens of medications. I could not have named what I was smelling from that alone, but I knew it was not nothing. I set the cup down and said I was not supposed to have caffeine, and that I had forgotten to mention that when she offered. She said chamomile was caffeine-free. I said my doctor had me avoiding all teas as a precaution and apologized for not saying so earlier. She watched me for a moment. Then she smiled and said it was no trouble. We talked for another 20 minutes. She was pleasant. She walked me to the door. She hugged me, which she had never done before. I sat in my car in her driveway for a full minute before I drove away. My hands were steady, but my thoughts were not. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself that not every unusual smell was a threat, that I was a pregnant woman with heightened senses and an already strained relationship, and I was reading into things. I drove home. I said nothing to my husband that evening. 11 days later, she invited me back. She said she wanted to give me some baby items she had saved from when my husband was small, a blanket, a photograph album, some things she thought I would want to have. She said it in a message to my phone, not to my husband's. I read it twice. I did not want to go. But I also thought that refusing would create a different kind of problem, and I had not yet fully allowed myself to believe what my instincts were telling me. I told my husband I was going. He said that was great, that it sounded like things were improving. He kissed my forehead and went back to his laptop. I recorded again. Same pocket, same position. This time she showed me to the sitting room at the back of the house rather than the kitchen. She brought out a cardboard box of baby items and placed it on the coffee table between us. The blanket was soft and yellow. The photograph album was full of pictures of my husband as a small child, gap-toothed and squinting into the sun. Then she sat across from me and her entire posture changed. The warmth left her face the way a light goes off. She leaned forward slightly and she said, in a voice that was completely even, that she needed me to understand something clearly. She said that her son was going to come into the estate when she passed, and that she was not going to allow that inheritance to be diluted by children she had no certainty about. She said she had consulted with her attorney and that there were legal structures she was putting in place. She said she hoped I would be smart enough to see that cooperating with those arrangements was in my best interest. She said that women who made trouble in situations like this tended to find that things became very difficult for them. I looked at her. I said, "Are you threatening me?" She said she was being practical, and that I should take it as such. I picked up the yellow blanket and I put it back in the cardboard box. I said I appreciated the thought but that I needed to go. I stood up. I picked up my bag. She stood up too, and she followed me to the hallway. And as I reached the top of the staircase, she said my name. I turned, and she put both hands flat against my back and shoved me. I went down 8 steps. I caught the railing with my left hand halfway down, which stopped me from falling the full length of the staircase. But the impact wrenched my wrist badly, and I hit my right hip on the edge of a step hard enough that I could not stand up right away. I sat at the bottom of the stairs on the hardwood floor, breathing, doing a fast internal inventory the way nurses do. Conscious, oriented, pain localized, no sharp abdominal pain, baby quiet, but I could not assess that here. She stood at the top of the stairs and looked down at me. She said, "I hope you understand now." I called my husband from the floor of her hallway. He arrived in 19 minutes. He took me directly to the emergency department. He was pale and shaking and kept asking me what happened, and I told him his mother pushed me down the stairs, and he said, "That is not possible." At the hospital, the triage nurse took one look at my wrist and my expression and moved me through quickly. I was given a bed, a fetal monitor, and a wrist x-ray within 40 minutes. My wrist was fractured, a clean break that would need a cast. My hip was severely bruised but not fractured. The fetal monitor showed my baby's heartbeat, strong and steady and completely indifferent to all of the drama happening outside. When the attending physician came in to review my results, my husband was with me. A few minutes later, a nurse came to tell him that his mother and aunt had arrived at the ER and were asking to be brought back. I looked at my husband. He looked at the floor. I said, "They are not allowed back here. Nobody is allowed back here except my husband." The nurse nodded and said she would let the front desk know. I heard later, from that same nurse, that my mother-in-law had become very loud at the front desk and had been escorted out of the building by hospital security. She was told that patient privacy rules meant she would not be receiving any information about my condition and that if she continued to cause a disturbance, the police would be called. She left. I never saw her set foot in that building. A police officer came to take my statement about an hour later. My husband sat in the chair by the window and said almost nothing. I told the officer exactly what happened. I described the staircase, the placement of her hands, the direction of the push. I told the officer about the threatening things she had said. Then I told the officer that I had a recording of part of the conversation. My husband turned from the window. I took my phone out of my bag and played 2 minutes of the recording. The officer asked if I could forward him the complete file. I said yes. I asked the officer if this recording could be used as evidence. He said Ohio is a one-party consent state for recordings, which meant that since I was present in the conversation, the recording was legal and admissible. My husband was very quiet for a long time after the officer left. That night, in the hospital room they kept me overnight for monitoring, he sat beside my bed and he said he did not know what to say. He said he was sorry. He said he loved me. He said he had known for years that his mother was difficult, but that he had never believed she was capable of something like this. I looked at him in the low light of the hospital room and I felt a grief that had nothing to do with anger. I felt it the way you feel something that has been true for a long time but that you finally have to stop pretending is temporary. He had known she was difficult. He had called it difficult for 3 years instead of calling it what it was. And when I had turned to him at that dinner table, he had looked at his plate. I said, "I know you love me, but loving someone does not protect them if you will not stand up for them." He started to say something. I asked him to let me rest. The charges were filed. My mother-in-law was arrested 9 days after I was discharged from the hospital. She was charged with felony assault and reckless endangerment of an unborn child. Her attorney tried to argue that I had lost my footing on the stairs, that it was an accident, that I had a history of being overdramatic. Her attorney was very good. The recording was better. There was a specific section of the recording, 7 minutes and 40 seconds in, where she said, clearly and without ambiguity, that women who made trouble in situations like this tended to find that things became very difficult for them. and that she hoped I would understand her meaning. Her attorney argued it was open to interpretation. The jury did not find it open to interpretation. I want to talk about what happened with my husband, because I think people assume it ended simply. It did not end simply. He did not side with his mother. He was at every court appearance. He gave a statement to police confirming the pattern of behavior he had witnessed over 3 years. He was not, in the end, the coward I feared he might become. But there is a difference between a person who eventually does the right thing and a person you can build a life with, and I had to sit with that difference for a very long time. He wanted to reconcile. He wanted us to raise our daughter together. He came to couples counseling with me for 6 months. He was honest in those sessions in a way he had never been honest before. He acknowledged that he had prioritized keeping the peace over protecting me. He acknowledged that he had known, on some level, for years. He said he was ashamed. I believed him. I also believed that the version of me who had smiled through 3 years of Sunday dinners and convinced herself it was manageable was not a version I was willing to return to. Not because I did not care about him, but because I had learned, at the bottom of that staircase, that I was the only person in that house who was going to protect myself and my child. And I was not willing to outsource that responsibility to someone who had already shown me, when it mattered most, that he would look at his plate. We divorced 11 months after my daughter was born. It was quiet and without additional conflict. He pays child support consistently, and he sees our daughter every other weekend, and she loves him, and I am glad she does. I do not carry bitterness about him. I carry clarity. My mother-in-law was convicted on both charges. She received 4 years and served just under 3 before early release on medical grounds. I did not attend the sentencing. I had a 4-month-old and a new lease on a 2-bedroom apartment, and a plan for the next year of my life that I was more interested in than watching the consequences land on someone who had already lost me completely. I used the 18 months of pregnancy and early maternity leave to study for my nurse practitioner certification, which I had been putting off for years. I passed on the first attempt. I started working under a supervising physician who ran a small private practice and who, within 8 months, offered me a partnership track. 3 years after that, I bought her out and renamed the practice. Now it is mine. I want to tell you something that took me a long time to understand about the fear I felt on that staircase. For a long time, I thought the most frightening moment was the push itself, the sudden weightlessness, the railing in my hand, the floor coming. But when I actually revisit it clearly, that is not the most frightening moment. The most frightening moment was every Sunday dinner I smiled through. Every time I said she's just like that along with my husband, even though I knew better. Every time I told my own instincts to be quiet because the alternative admitting what I was living inside felt too large to hold. The push was violent and it was criminal, and it was wrong in a way that left no room for interpretation. But the slow erosion that happened before it, the years of small surrenders, the steady practice of overriding my own knowing, that was the part I had to consciously dismantle afterward, piece by piece. In order to trust myself again, I see patients now who carry that same erosion. I see it in the way they qualify their own symptoms, the way they minimize, the way they apologize for taking up space in my office. I was trained to read vital signs, and I have learned that the most important ones are not always the ones on the monitor. I kneel down on the floor now next to my daughter, and she hands me the plush elephant, missing most of its stuffing, looking profoundly pleased with herself. I hold it and look at its worn face, and I think about yellow blankets in cardboard boxes and staircases and the particular clarity that only arrives after something breaks. I am not grateful for what my mother-in-law did to me. I want to be precise about that. I do not believe in the narrative that abuse is a gift because of what it teaches you. What she did was criminal and cruel, and she deserved every consequence she received. But I am deeply, completely grateful for who I became in the months after I lay on that hardwood floor and decided, with a fractured wrist and a baby on a monitor, that I was going to stop waiting for someone else to protect me. I spent years taking care of other people's health. It took a woman at the top of a staircase to make me understand that my own wellness, not just physical, but the kind that lives in your boundaries and your voice and your refusal to minimize what you know, was always going to be my responsibility first. You cannot heal people who are committed to harming you. You can document them, you can record them, You can press charges, cooperate with the prosecution, and testify clearly. And then you can walk out of that courtroom and spend the rest of your life building something they cannot reach. My daughter looks at me with the elephant in my hands and says more with complete confidence, because she has not yet learned to soften her needs into requests. She just says what she wants. I am working, every day, on becoming more like her. If any part of this story lives in something you have experienced, I would really like to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever had to draw a hard line with family to protect yourself or someone you love? Whatever your story is, you are welcome to share it here. If this reached you in a real way, please like and subscribe to Recovery Stories. We have more stories of resilience and rebuilding coming every week, and every single one of them belongs to someone who decided that their peace was worth fighting for.